The mist had spread over the town. Uncertain silhouettes were not visible beyond the lights. Silence had filled the streets. It seemed as if all living beings had gone to sleep. Only one foreign voice broke the silence. From beyond the town's limits, a deep and eerie whisper came. As people peered through their curtains to look outside, they began to see the town's terrifying future. The town's elders remembered an old legend that had been told many years ago. According to the legend, whenever the mist arrived, the Shadow City would come back to life and approach the town. The Shadow City was not a place for the living or the dead. It was a place that stole people's souls, and no one ever returned from there. But was it just a legend? The townsfolk decided to see for themselves whether the legend was true or not. The mist enveloped the town and began to draw people in. First, some people ventured out into the streets and started moving deeper into the mist. Many left their town behind, and others who heard the fading sounds followed them. Sarah and David, a young couple from the town, were among those who resisted this strange call. They held each other tightly and refused to leave their town, but the mist was closing in on them rapidly and engulfing them. "What should we do, David?" Sarah asked with a worried expression. David smiled bravely. "Don't worry, Sarah. We won't go into this mist together. We need to find a way out." They began to search and finally found traces of an old road that extended beyond the town's limits. They followed the road and came across the footprints of those who had disappeared into the mist. The mist was thickening and they couldn't see ahead, but the road compelled them to continue. They encountered more people as they walked, but these people seemed like ghosts. Their eyes were vacant, their faces pale, and their lips turned blue. Sarah and David realized that these were the ones whose souls had been stolen. The Shadow City was real, and the mist had captured the townsfolk. To avoid losing their way, they held on to each other tightly and continued forward. The mist grew denser, and they couldn't even see their own footsteps. Suddenly, a massive gate appeared before them. Strange symbols and markings adorned the gate, but they held no meaning. David exerted a great effort to push the gate, and it opened silently. They entered and descended into a vast emptiness. It was dark and quiet, with only the sound of their own breaths and heartbeats. In the depths, a strange light began to flicker. That's when the curtain of darkness around them lifted, and they saw a colossal city before them. This city was the most intricate and terrifying they could have ever imagined. Buildings, structures, and roads had no logical order. Everything was random and senseless. Sarah and David began to explore this strange city. As they wandered, they encountered bizarre entities. They looked human-like, but their faces were expressionless and their eyes were empty. Sarah and David realized that these beings were the ones whose souls had been stolen. Eventually, they decided to move towards the city's center. There, they saw a terrifying being seated on a massive throne. Its eyes burned with fire, and its skin was as black as night. It was like a demon. "Welcome," said the being, its voice sending shivers down their spines. "I am the Shadow King. You have come here to steal souls, haven't you?" Sarah and David nodded, fear in their eyes. They felt powerless in the presence of the Shadow King's overwhelming force. The Shadow King roared, and he began to steal Sarah and David's souls. They both felt their very essence being drained away. Their memories, emotions, and identities were slowly fading. They were ceasing to be human. However, a glimmer of hope appeared at the last moment. Sarah and David found the last bit of resistance within themselves and held on to each other tightly. This loving touch was enough to protect their souls. The Shadow King's power waned, and the being retreated. Sarah and David continued to fight together and finally defeated the Shadow King. Its power dissipated, and they reclaimed their souls. However, the Shadow City still stood. Sarah and David decided to leave the city and search for a way to help destroy it. The city's strange and chaotic structure perplexed them, but they remained determined. Over time, they discovered a hidden power source within the city. Destroying this source would eradicate the Shadow City once and for all, but the task was fraught with danger and difficulty. Sarah and David, risking their lives, decided to destroy the power source. In the meantime, the city's inhabitants had learned of the death of the Shadow King and started a rebellion. The city's streets became a battlefield, but Sarah and David remained resolute. Finally, they found the power source and began to destroy it. At that moment, the Shadow City started to tremble and collapse. Sarah and David were trapped amidst the crumbling walls, but at the last moment, a beam of light appeared, and they found themselves safe. The city collapsed, and the Shadow City never returned. Sarah and David returned to their town and announced the destruction of the Shadow City. The townspeople celebrated their courage and determination. Sarah and David thought of the terrifying adventure as a nightmare, but it was an experience they would never forget. For them, the real danger was the battle against the darkness within people, and they were determined to fight it together.